nothing you hear, and only one half that you see.
My family moved into our current house about a year ago. It's a charming old home, full of character and history. The previous owners had lived there for decades and assured us it was a lovely place. For the most part, it has been. That is, until we started hearing things from the basement. It began a couple of months ago. My husband, let's just call him Eric, and I were in the living room when we first noticed it. We were watching TV, and suddenly we heard a faint, echoing voice coming from the basement. It sounded like someone was having a conversation down there. We muted the TV and listened. Sure enough, there it was, a muffled dialogue, just loud enough to be unsettling, but too quiet to make out any words. Eric went down to check, but as soon as he opened the basement door, the voices stopped. He flipped on the lights and looked around, but everything seemed perfectly normal. No one was there. Puzzled, we shrugged it off and went back to our show. Over the next few weeks, the voices became more frequent. Sometimes they were loud and clear. Other times, just a whisper. What was strange was that they seemed to mimic our own conversations. Once, while Eric and I were discussing dinner plans, we heard our own voices echoed back at us from the basement, saying the exact same things we had just said. It got to a point where we were avoiding going down there altogether, unless absolutely necessary. One night, our teenage daughter, Lily, came to us, looking frightened. She said she heard us arguing in the basement. But the thing is, Eric and I were both upstairs, in the kitchen preparing for dinner. We hadn't been arguing, and we certainly hadn't been in the basement. We decided it was time to take action. Eric set up an old tape recorder at the top of the basement stairs, hoping to catch the voices. For a few nights, we recorded hours of audio. When we finally played it back, we heard them. Our own voices talking, laughing, and even crying. Things escalated when the voices started calling our names. Late at night, I would hear Eric calling from the basement, asking for help, even though he was sound asleep right next to me. One evening, Lily heard me singing her favorite childhood lullaby from the basement. She rushed down, but no one was there. The breaking point came when we had guests over for dinner. We were all sitting in the dining room when we heard a loud crash from the basement, followed by Eric's voice, shouting for help. Our guests were startled, and everyone rushed to the basement door. We opened it to find nothing. No mess, no Eric, just the empty room below. We decided enough was enough. We contacted a local priest, even though we ourselves are not religious. He came to bless the house. He performed a cleansing ritual, saying prayers and sprinkling holy water in every corner, focusing on the basement. For a while it seemed to work. The voices stopped and the house felt lighter. But then, a few nights ago, the whispers returned. We heard them faint and distant, slowly growing louder each night. We're considering moving now. It's not just the fear, it's the exhaustion, the constant anxiety. We can't keep living like this. If anyone has any advice or has dealt with something similar, we're desperate for guidance. We just want to feel safe in our own home again. I was a sophomore in high school when my parents decided to buy a larger house. It was an old, creaky place on the outskirts of town, but it had plenty of space and a big backyard. It seemed perfect for our family. At least, That's what we thought at the time. Shortly after we moved in, I started noticing strange things. One night while I was alone in my room playing Xbox, I heard my mum calling my name. It was odd since she wasn't supposed to be home. I paused my game and called out, "Mum, is that you?" No answer. The house remained eerily quiet. I went downstairs to check, but the house was empty. My parents and little sister weren't back from my sister's basketball game yet. Feeling a bit creeped out, I decided to text my mum. She confirmed that they were still out and wouldn't be home for another hour. I tried to brush it off as my imagination, but the feeling of unease lingered. Over the next few weeks, the occurrences became more frequent. Sometimes I heard my mum's voice calling out to me when I was doing my homework. Other times it happened when I was trying to sleep. It was always my mum's voice, but she was never actually there. Each time I would find myself alone in the house, with no logical explanation for the noise. One night, I invited my friend Sam over to hang out. We were in the middle of a game when he suddenly asked, "Do you hear that? It sounds like someone talking." My blood ran cold. Sam described hearing my mum's voice, and I knew he wasn't joking. We followed the sound to the living room, but as soon as we entered, it went silent. I finally told my parents about the strange occurrences. They were skeptical at first, but my mum suggested to set up my phone on voice recorder to see if we could catch anything. Sure enough, the next morning when we played back the recording, we heard the faint, unmistakable sound of my mum's voice calling my name. Things escalated when I started hearing my sister's voice as well. One afternoon, I was alone in my room doing homework when I heard her calling my name from the hallway. "Jake, come here." It was her voice, but it sounded off. Too flat. Too mechanical. I stepped into the hallway, but no one was there. My sister was still at school. That night at dinner, I shared what happened with my family. My little sister looked pale and admitted she had heard our mum's voice too, when she was alone in her room. My parents were visibly unsettled, but tried to reassure us that it was just our imaginations playing tricks on us. Despite their attempts to stay calm, the weirdness persisted. We started hearing the voices more frequently, and from different parts of the house, always when no one else was present. The situation became too stressful to ignore. After having lived there for 3 years, the constant anxiety took its toll. We couldn't sleep properly, and every creak of the house made our hearts pound. Finally, my parents decided it was time to move. We packed up and left the house, practically fleeing from the unsettling entity that had taken over our lives. It's been 8 years since we moved out, and I'm thankful that the events stopped after that. Sometimes I wonder if the new owners have experienced the same things, or if the house has finally found peace. I hope for their sake that the odd occurrences remain just a mystery for me, and never a reality for them. A few months ago, last fall to be precise, I moved into a quaint 2-story townhouse in a small town. It was exactly what I'd been looking for. Quiet, secluded, and the price was too good to turn down. I should have known that the price was too good to be true. It started out one evening. I was washing dishes after dinner when I first noticed something strange. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of movement just beyond the kitchen door. I looked up, but nothing was there. Figuring it must have just been a trick of the light or my imagination, I didn't put much thought into it. The next night, while I was reading in the living room, I heard what sounded like footsteps on the front porch. Slow, deliberate steps, as if someone was pacing back and forth. I got up to check, but like before, there was no one there. Days turned to weeks, and the occurrences became more frequent. I would hear soft whispers coming from other rooms. Barely audible, but just enough to make the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Despite thorough searches, I never found anyone or anything to explain the noises. One night, I invited a friend, Sara, to stay over. I hadn't told her about the strange happenings, not wanting to sound paranoid. As we were chatting in the living room, she suddenly turned pale and asked, "Did you hear that?" It was a faint sound of someone calling her name, coming from upstairs. I immediately felt a chill, knowing that I'd heard similar whispers before. We both went upstairs to check, but found nothing. Sara was visibly shaken and urged me to get some help. After she left the next morning, I started searching around on the internet. I found various accounts of people experiencing similar phenomena: indistinct whispers, phantom footsteps, and fleeting voices. Things escalated further one night while I was trying to sleep. I was awoken by the sound of my own voice calling out from the hallway. It was an exact replica, down to the tone and pitch I use when talking to myself. I froze, heart pounding, too scared to move. After a few moments, the voice stopped and I finally mustered the courage to get up and check. As expected, the hallway was empty. I decided to set up a recording device in the hallway where I had heard my voice. For the first few days, I didn't catch anything unusual, but on the fifth night, when I reviewed the recording, I heard something that made my blood run cold. The device had captured faint, yet distinct sounds of whispering. And at one point, my own voice saying things I had never said out loud. There was clearly no solid form, just the eerie sound of my own words. I showed the recording to a local paranormal investigator. He suggested that these entities might be tied to the house's history, feeding off the fear they create. He recommended a cleansing ritual which he performed a few days later, burning sage and saying prayers in each room. For a brief period, the house felt peaceful. The noises ceased and I started to relax again. But a week later, the whispers started again. Softer but definitely present. It's as if the entity is regaining strength little by little. I'm now contemplating moving out. The thought of leaving this charming house saddens me, but the constant anxiety is taking its toll. I still hear my own voice in the dead of night, calling out from various locations in the house. If anyone out there has experienced something similar or can offer advice, I would be grateful. I moved into my new apartment about 6 months ago. It's on the third floor of an old building. Small, but it's enough for me. For the first few months, things were perfectly normal. But then a few weeks ago, something strange started happening. It was on a Sunday evening when I first heard it. I was relaxing on my couch, watching TV, when I heard a knock on my front door. It was 3 knocks in quick succession, pretty loud too, like someone was in a hurry. I paused the show and went to check, but after looking through my peephole, there was no one there. I opened the door and stepped out into the hallway and looked around and just shrugged. Must have been a prank, I thought. The next evening, the knocking returned. This time, it was just one loud knock, like someone punching the door. I jumped up. My heart was instantly racing and rushed to open the door. Nothing. The hallway was empty again. I thought maybe it was the neighbors, but it didn't sound like it was coming from their doors. Over the next few nights, the knocking continued, always at different times. Sometimes it was a single knock, other times multiple, but I never found anyone there. I started getting paranoid, checking the peephole constantly to no avail. It was driving me insane. One night the knocking was accompanied by something different. I heard my own voice, faint and distant, calling my name from the hallway. "Liam, come here." It was eerie hearing my own voice outside my door. I hurried to open the door, but once again, no one was there. The hallway was as empty as ever. I mentioned it to my friend Marcus over coffee. He laughed and said it was probably just kids messing around. Still, he did agree to stay over one night, just to check it out. We were sitting in the living room, talking, when right on cue, there were 3 loud knocks on the door, followed by Marcus's voice saying, "Liam, it's me." We both jumped up and ran to the door, yanking it open. Empty hallway, as usual. There is no way anyone could have escaped in time at the speed in which we opened the door. We didn't hear any footsteps either. Marcus decided to stay another night, curious to see if it would happen again. And it did. This time, while we were watching a movie, we heard 2 slow, deliberate knocks, followed by my own voice calling out from my bathroom, "Marcus, can you come here?" We checked every corner of that hallway, and even the bathroom, but there was nothing there. Things got worse. The knocking expanded to different parts of the apartment, sometimes accompanied by my own voice, or Marcus's. Even when we were both sitting together, I'd hear it on the walls while in the bathroom, or on the ceiling when I was in bed. It got bolder, louder, like it was trying to get inside my head. One night I even heard a faint but distinct knocking, and my own voice coming from the closet. I opened it, but of course, there was nothing. The eeriest incident occurred about a week ago. It was late at night, and I was trying to fall asleep. Suddenly I heard 3 soft knocks right next to my ear, as if someone was knocking on my nightstand, followed by my own voice, whispering, "Wake up, Liam." I jumped out of bed, switched on the light and checked the room. Nothing. That was the turning point. I couldn't stay there anymore. Since then I've barely been home. I pop in to grab what I need and leave as quickly as possible. I'm on the lookout for a new place at the moment, but finding something within my budget is tough. I'm just thankful my friend Marcus witnessed it, and he's put me up for the meantime. My biggest fear is, if I do move, what happens if this follows me to my new apartment? A few months ago, my friend Jen and I decided we desperately needed a break from our hectic lives. I work as a software developer, frequently putting in long hours debugging code and meeting tight deadlines. Jenna, on the other hand, is a nurse, often pulling double shifts at the hospital and dealing with the emotional toll of caring for patients. We both felt exhausted and stressed out, needing a retreat to unwind. Originally, our plan was to go with our mutual friend Emma, but she couldn't get the time off at the last minute. In fact, it was a miracle that both Jenna and I managed to coordinate our schedules to make this trip happen. We rented a cabin in the woods. It was a perfect getaway, quiet, secluded, and surrounded by nature. We were both avid hikers, so we spent our days hiking and nights by the fire, enjoying the peaceful ambience. For the first time in months, we felt like we could finally breathe. But soon, the very isolation we sought started to feel menacing. One night, while I was reading by the fireplace, I clearly heard Jenna's voice calling my name from outside. "Hey, can you come out here?" it called. Confused, I put down my book and listened more intently. The voice called again, almost exactly the same as the first time. "Hey, can you come out here?" The familiarity of Jenna's voice sent chills down my spine, especially since I was almost certain she was busy in the kitchen. I stepped outside, but saw no one, just the dark, empty woods. I brushed off the incident, attributing it to my frazzled nerves from work. But the next day, while hiking, I heard my name being called from deeper in the forest. "Come over here." The voice was unmistakably mine, mimicking my tone perfectly. We scanned the area, but there was no one in sight. The experience left us both uneasy, and we cut the hike short, returning to the cabin. The following evening, while sitting by the fire, I heard Jenna's voice again, this time calling, "Hey, come here, I found something." Jenna looked right at me in shock. She hadn't moved an inch. We both rushed outside, but found only the still night air. That night, Jenna and I decided to sleep in the same room, too frightened to be alone. The voices continued, calling out to us from various parts of the cabin and surrounding woods, each time growing louder and more insistent. They mimicked our conversations perfectly, creating an eerie atmosphere that kept us wide awake. By morning, we were both on edge. Determined not to spend another night in that cabin, we packed our things and left. The sense of relief as we drove away was palpable, but the memory of those voices lingered. Months have passed since then, and while I often think back to those peaceful first days at the cabin, I'm relieved to have left the unsettling presence behind. Sometimes I wonder if anyone else has stayed there and heard the same voices. I know one thing's for sure. Both Jenna and I will think twice before going on another cabin retreat. So, this just started happening a couple of months ago, and I honestly don't know what we're dealing with. Some background. My wife and I bought this house 3 years ago. It's a cozy little place in a quiet neighborhood. Nothing fancy, but just enough for the two of us. We've never had anything remotely strange happen here, until now. It began one night when I was alone in the living room. My wife, Sara, was working a late shift at the hospital where she works as a nurse. I was watching TV when I heard her voice coming from the hallway. It was clear as day. She was calling my name, John. I paused the show and got up, thinking she must have come home early and I didn't hear her arrive. But when I walked to the hallway, it was empty. I even checked the driveway. Her car wasn't there. I brushed it off, thinking I must have imagined it, or maybe it was a TV. But then, it happened again the next night. This time I was upstairs in our bedroom, and I swear I heard Sara calling me from the kitchen. "John, can you come here for a sec?" It was unmistakable. I ran downstairs, my heart racing, but found nothing. When she got home, I told her about it. She looked at me like I was crazy, but reassured me it was probably just stress or my mind playing tricks. For a while I tried to believe that, but then it got worse. We started hearing each other's voices in strange places around the house when the other person wasn't even home. One morning, Sara said she thought she heard me calling to her from the basement while she was in the shower. I was already at work by then. We even started hearing other odd sounds, like whispering and laughing in the dead of night. Things reached a new level of terrifying when we both heard voices at the same time. We were sitting in the living room having dinner when we heard shouting from the hallway. It sounded like my voice, aggressively calling out to Sara. But we couldn't really make out any other words. We checked every room, but of course there was no one there. One evening, curious and desperate for answers, we decided to set up our phones to record while we went about our routine. When we played back the recordings, we heard our names being called multiple times, along with whispers of sentences that didn't make sense. Help us, get out, and they're coming. The voices were faint, but undeniably there. In our search for answers, we stumbled upon forums discussing similar experiences. People spoke of entities that mimicked the voices of their loved ones. Some suggested these entities feed off negative emotions, while others believed they were trying to communicate or even warn us. But the explanations didn't make us feel any safer. We considered all our options, including getting a paranormal investigator or even a priest. It sounds ridiculous, but at this point, we were willing to try anything to reclaim our home. The thought of selling the house crossed our minds, but who would buy a place with such a disturbing history? Our cat, Boris, who had always been relaxed and lazy, started acting skittish. He would hiss at empty spaces and refuse to enter certain rooms. It was like he could sense something we couldn't see. Pets are supposed to be sensitive to these things, right? Last weekend, we had friends over to try and lighten the mood. We didn't mention the weird occurrences, just tried to enjoy a normal evening. Everything was going well until our friend, Mark, went to use the restroom. He came back pale and shaken, saying he heard Sara's voice, whispering his name right behind him while he was washing his hands, even though she was in the kitchen with us the whole time. It was the exact moment we realized, whatever this thing was, it wasn't confined to just us. It could affect others too. The final straw was last Saturday. We were both home, enjoying a quiet evening, when we heard footsteps upstairs. Heavy, deliberate steps. We looked at each other, fear written all over our faces. We grabbed a flashlight and headed up. But just like every other time, there was no one there. The house was as still as a tomb. Now we can't sleep properly. Every creak of the house, every shadow, makes our hearts pound. We've resorted to staying at my brother's place a few nights a week, just to get some decent rest. We're scared to be home alone, and even when we're together, we can't shake the feelings that we're being watched or listened to. We don't know what this thing is or why it's mimicking our voices. Whatever it is, it doesn't seem friendly. We're still considering bringing in a professional to cleanse the house, but where does one even start with that process? For now, we're just trying to stick together and stay out of the house as much as possible. If anyone has any advice or has been through something similar, we're all ears. Hello watchers and listeners, thank you so much for watching. If you have a story to share, please send it to my email in the description below. This channel is mostly made up of stories sent in by viewers or people they know. Another way to support the channel is to sign up for my Patreon, where you can watch my videos ad-free. More perks will be added in the new year. Also, I will be adding new designs to the merch store, so keep an eye out for that. Thank you all for your continuous support. And remember,